bit about myself. Mi chiamo Matt, e sono un programmatore, and I'm a front-end developer for the past 4 years. I'm currently 19 years old, so you see on the landscape of all the elder speakers, I'm only 19 years old, meaning just for a point of comparison, while Elad Schechter started working on his CSS, I was just trying to avoid diapers, just so you understand the reference. So I would like to take you on a journey to find out the best front-end technology that suits your needs, that is the best for your project. But first, I want to tell you a bit about my experience working with UX designers. In the past 4 years, I've worked with 3 UX designers. One of them was my twin brother, Maor. Now, Maor and I, look how similar we are, that's crazy. Maor and I made several projects together. While I was responsible on the front end, he was responsible on the back end and UX design. But there was a problem. My brother didn't really understand what is simple to develop and what was considered to be more complex. He would show me all kinds of weird and complex UI sketches, and then he was like, "So, can you finish coding it today?" On top of it, he used to send me just the sketches, and he thought that I can figure out the rest on my own. And the bigger the project was, the more confusing it got. So when it comes to developing a sketch, what, everything okay? Okay. So when it comes to developing a sketch, there are two things a developer needs. The first one is, as obvious as it is the sketch. And the sketch is the looks of the app. Now, the looks needs to contain as many screens as possible. I mean, PC, laptop, tablet, mobile, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, Apple Watch, while also provide other stuff such as comments, color palette, and it could be really nice to get a prototype. Usually, brands develop a design system or blueprint, which is a comprehensive document that specifies the rules on how to design for that brand. A notable example for that is Spotify, as well as NASA. Now, they built this site showing how to properly use their logo. And the second thing we need, which is pretty underestimated, and it's this specifications. And specifications is the mind of the operation. It includes a description about the project, the requirements for the site, as well as the behavior of each page comprehensively. This helps developers to know exactly what kind of technology they should use, since they now have the bigger picture. So except of supplying more information, there are other things we can do to improve the designer-developer workflow. And the first thing is, as everybody said before, is to communicate. People just talk to each other. When it comes to implementing sketches, it is important you be in touch with your fellow designer. Communication saves a lot of time from getting lost and from doing an unnecessary job that, believe me, no one wants to do. And the second thing, and I want to show you this, is that you should adopt an entire workflow. Now, there are agile workflows, and I'm halfway reading this book called Lean UX, which is a book describing a whole hierarchy that enhances the workflow between developers and designers, and it basically makes the job easier. But how? Its main principle is to provide feedbacks as soon as possible between developers and designers, and thus reduce the amount of product iterations. So let's say we got a sketch to implement. How do we choose the technology? So first of all, it's the design that matters. If you recognize a set of components that were taken from a specific library, like a Material UI, Material ICSS, Bootstrap, maybe using them will shorten your time of coding and hence will give you more time to deal with other fuck-ups that will eventually appear. Also, if you notice a simple layout or a simple sketch in general, maybe using Bootstrap will be good for you, thanks to its comfortable grid system and simple components. Second of all, a specification is a key. This allows us as developers not only to see the bigger picture, but also to predict challenges that might appear during development. Once detected, it is highly likely that a technology will solve our problem. A common example for that will be a complex component that has different states and need to act differently, or a template that dynamically changes. So yeah, in that case, use a technology. Third of all is the comfort of coding. Now, that factor has chosen the technology many times among developers. That's also why the majority only uses few technologies. And do not get me wrong, I do believe it's important. A comfortable coding environment brings results fast and with less bugs. However, in 2021, we can see a lot of technologies sharing the same features. So when it comes picking between them, comfort is the strongest factor. Now, A great example for that is choosing between React, Angular, and Vue. Most of the time, comfort plays a major role here since they all do the same thing in general, yet syntax is their main difference. Now, in general, I should also mention that you shouldn't stack too many technologies. Make a thorough research and use the one that gives you the best advantage across both starting point and when things get rough. So, wait, do we need like to choose a specific technology? Well, no. It is sufficient we know what kind of technology we need in general. The reason for that is the involvement of comfort in the equation. Once I know what kind of technology I need, I will 90% automatically lean towards the one I'm most familiar with. The other 10% is a split between curiosity and rare use cases where the other criteria matters a lot, like for example in performance wise. So what are the kinds of technologies out there? So the first one, it's the most common one, it's the reactive technologies. Reactive technology is responsible for DOM manipulations based on changes of data. So in normal English will be HTML that changes based on data in JavaScript. The second kind is CSS preprocessors as introduced by Alpines Schechter. And we see them quite often nowadays. And what they do is that basically they extend the normal CSS functionality by providing us nesting, iterations, conditions, functions, built-in functions, mixins, variables. And that's an amazing product that we can use to ease our coding. And the third kind is also quite common, and it's CSS frameworks. Now, their only purpose is to make the job easier by providing us certain tools and pre-written components. Now, you might have heard about some of them, like Bootstrap, Tailwind CSS, Bulma, Materialize CSS, Foundation. And the majority of CSS frameworks are implemented mostly with CSS. Yet there might be some JavaScript involved that we will need to add furthermore. And the fourth kind, and you won't see it around too often, but I should mention them, and is the animation libraries. Animation libraries allow us to implement animations rather easily, I must say, using the power of JavaScript. This is really helpful when you need to implement complex animations. This is also helpful when rapid prototyping. When I have to deliver a prototype quickly, considering using animations library won't be lightheaded. Now, in a personal matter, I like implementing my animations manually, meaning using a bit of CSS and JavaScript that activates the CSS animation. But in case when the animation is just way too complex, using animation libraries will be a must, at least for me. And of course, these are only the main categories. There are more, yet they are just less common. Now, the reasons why we do need front-end technologies are rather obvious, but I want to discuss about why we don't need them. So don't forget that using technologies too much might make us soft. At some point, programmatically speaking, some of us will end up like those I mean, gravitationally challenged people from Wall-E who can't even move without their floating chair. The problem happens when at some point we won't even possess the fundamental knowledge to solve common problems, which then will even force us to add even more technologies on top of those we already use. And it is quite a slippery slope. That's why I always recommend not getting too comfortable and knowing the basics as best as possible. Now, this is the main part of my talk. Here, I would like to recommend you some technologies that I work with. Some of them fit to all scales, some of them fit to only small scale projects. And I hope if you, I bet that most of you don't know around half of these technologies well. So stick around. So post CSS. So you're looking here at the DIY of CSS. Post CSS is a post processor, meaning it takes an unready CSS file or a CSS file on steroids and turns it into a normal one. Now, no need to mention it has an auto prefixer, which helps with browser compatibility, or that it can work with all Gulp, Webpack, Grunt, Browserify, Snowpack, and etc. What I do want to mention is that it has an enormous amount of plugins, 324 plugins to be precise. Those plugins allow you to create some sort of a preprocessor of your own containing only the features you use and like. Of course, among these plugins, you will find their SAS features like mixings, functions, iterations. But what you will also find there are debugging tools, property shorthands, CSS polyfills, and you can even make your own plugin pretty easily. Now, all of these allow you to create your own preprocessor that suits you most. And a great example for that is the Hocus Pocus plugin. And that plugin unites two pseudo classes that usually come together, hover and focus, and give them a single pseudo class named Hocus. There is also Pocus, which is the unity of hover, focus, and active. Now, This plugin is really useful for those like me who forget to add sometimes the focus along with their hover for accessibility purposes. Another plugin I want to show you is pre-CSS. And as I mentioned, this is the main plugin for CSS stuff in post CSS because I said it's possible. So here, this is the main plugin for that. Now, it also contains all the good stuff like iterations, mixins, variables, functions. But the main thing I want to show you here is the code you see here in front of your eyes was written in pre-CSS. Do you notice the difference comparing to SCSS? Because I don't. And just for the lols, I also brought this. This is an Italian CSS. What they did is they basically took most of the properties and translated them to Italian. It's kind of ridiculous, but it also shows you the power of post CSS. What I'm trying to show you here is that just like Lego, you can take the plugins you want, stack them on top of each other, and build by that, you can build your own preprocessor. So here, for example, we can see that Altezza means height, margine sotto means margin from below, according to Google Translate, and importante and the colors are well translated as well. And another thing I want to show you is Alpine. And if you know Angular or Vue, you can meet Alpine. Alpine is a tool that does the exact same thing as Vue and Angular, yet it is way simpler and weighs only 75 kilobytes. What they did is that they removed any unnecessary features and left only the fundamental reactive abilities. So just like Vue and Angular, it uses HTML attributes to bind, to set data, to set events, or even to loop over elements in the HTML. And I'm showing you this tool because it might play a big role in rapid prototyping. So if you have to make a simple logic in a page from a sketch you got, and Vue, React, and Angular seems right overkill for that matter, using this might be the solution. In addition, due to its size, you can edit wherever you like using its CDN without worrying about the loading time. Now, personally, what I love about Alpine is that it adds sparkles. You know what I mean? I throw in a script and boom, I got powers to manipulate DOM, to bind inputs, and to bind attributes as I please. Now, that specific framework I would use only in small scale projects, since in bigger ones it might be helpful to use something, a bit more robust. So this is a super simple example for a dropdown using Alpine.js. What it's supposed to do that when you click the button, the UL appears, and when you click the UL disappears. Pretty simple. So the first thing we are doing here is to set X data, and this is where our reactive variables are stored. In this case, we only have one Boolean variable, and his name is open. Now, the element where X data is located is the boundary when I can access the reactive data. So for example, in this case, the open variable will be recognized only inside that div. So now, @click means that pressing that button will execute a JavaScript statement based on the given X data. So in our case, just setting the open variable to true. Now, all of the magic happens in the UL, where XShow means whether this element needs to be rendered or not. If XShow is true, the element will appear and all is lovely. Yet if it isn't, the element won't even show up in the DOM because the UL didn't even render. So by doing XShow equals open, we basically put the UL's balls at the variable's hand. Now, assuming your code gets quite long and complicated and you want to avoid putting it in the markup, you can extract the logic to a different script and call it from Xdata. For example, in this example, the markup Xdata calls the dropdown function, which returns an object similar to the previous example. However, in this case, we also have functions. But those functions are not mandatory. They're just here to simplify the code. They're not doing anything special. They're not special in any way, but they are, as you can see now, the markup looks a bit cleaner, comparing to the last one. So of course, there are other things it can do. These are its 14 main attributes. Each attribute adds sub-attributes, and the possibilities here are quite limitless. Third one, skeleton. That's great. I love it. Now, this is something I want to show to all tasteless developers like me that need to make something small really fast without a proper sketch while still keeping the looks of it attractive. So this is Skeleton. Skeleton is a boilerplate, consists with only 400 lines of code. It includes a super simple grid, some buttons, cool table design, and etc. I used it once when my brother asked me to make him a full functioning dashboard in 3 hours. And for me, their table design was a lifesaver since I already had a lot on my plate making the JavaScript code. And last one, I bet you all know that, and this is Tailwind. And Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that's being used for rapid prototyping. That means that it doesn't dichotomize by components, yet it dichotomizes by CSS properties. The good thing about Tailwind is that it allows you to create sketches faster and better than any other CSS framework. It's intuitive, it's based on purge CSS, meaning it's efficient, it's based on post CSS, meaning it's flexible, and if that's not enough, it also contains a collection of hundreds of Tailwind snippets, allowing you just to copy and paste it to your site, and that has a huge advantage because this allows your site to be prettier and more vibrant with zero effort, just copy paste. So here we can see a stupid simple example of a use with Tailwind CSS next to its equivalent in normal CSS. And we can see here two things. The first one is that Tailwind's abbreviations are rather intuitive. We got PT, which stands for padding top, MY, which stands for margin on the y-axis, and I bet you all know what text center means. And the second thing we can see here, that we can see that even inside the markup, the code is, pretty readable. I mean, it's no worse than an uncommented messy CSS file. And from all of that, we can understand that Tailwind CSS is not a bad thing at all. Also, using Tailwind CSS, you will get things like this or that. And both examples you can get right now from Tailwind UI. But what truly gives Tailwind its full CSS power, it's the use of variants. They basically allow us to use certain CSS classes in certain events. So just like CSS pseudo classes or media queries. Yet the awesome thing here is that everything is still inside the markup, which gives Tailwind's incredible amount of power just with a stupid list of classes in the HTML. So now Adam Wathan, the creator of Tailwind CSS, he knew a static configuration will never be enough for everybody. That's why he made us the config file, where each individual can either add or remove stuff from Tailwind. For example, if you need more sizes of border radius, you can simply add them to the config file. This example here, though, is special since I'm adding 2 more sizes to spacing. But wait, spacing doesn't exist. It's not even a property. And that's because spacing is extending many properties at once, as it can extend even others if needed. This allows us to set a constant group of sizes to all properties that need it, and hence have even a cleaner config file. So just so you understand really how simple it is to bend Tailwind CSS to match your needs, here you can write any plugin, just like in Post CSS, even with the same functions, and use it either as a utility, a variant, or a component. Now, all these plugins, you add to the config file and manage it from there globally, which makes things a bit more tidy. Now, and this is something I got to do. And these are like, I wanted to briefly mention other technologies that really captured my heart and I would like to recommend. And the first one is Svelte. And Svelte is a framework. So just like React and Vue, yet it adds another step of compilation, which reduces the load from the browser. Now, the nice thing about Svelte is that it allows us to do everything React and Vue do, yet in a lot simpler manner. So just so you understand how simple it is to make a reactive statement, all it takes is just to add a dollar sign and a colon before the statement. And that's an enormous advantage because if you know React or Angular, you know that it's not that simple. Now, if you're open-minded, I would like to recommend you a preprocessor named Stylus. And Stylus is an indent-based preprocessor, yet it makes the coding a lot more fun. Stylus has all the SAS features like variables, iterations, conditions, mixins, functions, built-in functions, yet it is done with a whole different syntax, as you can see. So to set a property in Stylus, we don't need a semicolon nor a colon. We just write the property, space afterwards, and the value we want to match to that property. Now, I found myself using Stylus more and more in the past 2 months because it's just fun. The third one I want to show you, and it's the last one, and it's Pug. Pug is an HTML compiler. It makes writing HTML faster and cleaner. Now, in order to make an element in Pug, we just write its CSS selector, as you can see here. Now, Pug also comes with iterations, conditions, mixins, and in general, it kind of, boosts up the whole idea of HTML experience. Now, both snippets you see here make the same HTML at the end. So it shows you that there is more than one approach in order to program with Pug and get the same HTML result. And the great thing about Pug, it's include keyword. And what it does is that it includes the file content and adds it to the finished HTML. And this is extremely useful when handling SVGs. Many times, SVG uglifies our HTML, so it's pretty effective against it. Now, I want to show you an example of how I analyze and choose the right technology. But as I said, we need a bit more than just a sketch. We need specifications. So allow me to fill in the gaps. This project was mostly made by me in the front-end section, and it was a legacy code, meaning I had someone else's code I needed to extend. In addition, this project was poorly managed and I had insane deadlines. So writing fast here was the key. And this project is a crush game, meaning there is a graph that keeps climbing starting from one, and we need to guess the number that the graph has to surpass. So if it surpassed the number we chose, then the profit will be our bet multiplied by the number we chose. And if it hasn't surpassed it, so we lost our bet. And for example, if I bet 100 coins on 2.5 and it crushes at 3, I will get 250 coins. But if I bet 100 coins on 10 and it crushes at 3, I will lose my 100 coins. So let's have a look at the challenges ahead of us in this sketch. The first most visible challenge here is the graph. We need to handle changes quickly and effectively while also getting information from the backend. The second challenge I see here is the layout. If we don't arrange the HTML properly, we will be in serious trouble. And on top of all of it, we got this button, which complicates things even more. When pressed, the chat section needs to move off screen and extend the main layout, which is where the graph is. So we got here a lot of problems. So before I show you what I would have chosen, let me show you what the former developer has chosen. So the backend was PHP and without Node.js. And that was a huge drawback when choosing between technologies. The first thing he chose was using Bootstrap, and for no apparent reason. I mean, there were pages that could use Bootstrap, but in the main dashboard, why? So if we look at the dashboard again, this layout will be extremely frustrating to implement with Bootstrap 4. In addition, there are no similar components to the framework, so why using it? The other thing he used was as CSS, maybe because he felt comfortable with it. I don't know. But then I was rushed in to replace him. And the first thing I've done was to get rid of SCSS and use normal CSS. At the time, I didn't see it necessary since we didn't use most of SAS features, and I felt pretty comfortable with the normal CSS. And then, in order to deal with the graph, I added Vue.js and Canvas.js, which worked directly in the browser and with each other. Canvas.js was the library responsible for the graph, the axis, the looks of the whole graph. And in order to write the rest of the JavaScript as fast as possible, I used jQuery, which boosted things up a little bit and helped the code to be a bit more readable. Now, let me show you what I would do, whether I would be there from scratch. So let's assume we're still stuck with PHP. The first thing I would have done would be to detach from PHP as fast as possible. That means I don't want to write in a .php file like I've done before. That I can do using Ajax and lazy loading in coordination with the backend. Of course, I need to mention that the graph itself was, of course, supposed to be based on WebSocket and not Ajax. Now, at this point, because of the graph, I know I need a reactive technology. I would still use Vue because it's one of the fastest frameworks and I love it. And yet now, at this point, if I had time, I would implement the graph manually using D3. D3 is very powerful library that makes dynamic elements that change according to data. So that means I can make the graph manually by stacking the elements and control every aspect of the graph. But using Canvas.js was also okay. And regarding the CSS, I would use either Tailwind CSS or one of the preprocessors, but not both. Tailwind CSS has a lot of power on its own, as it can style and organize the layouts and the components without breaking a sweat. So what do I want you to learn from this talk? First of all, research, 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 research. Look at the libraries, test them, and if you're not experienced enough, try building things from scratch. When it comes to working with a designer, try to be nice to him as nice as possible, and that's from my experience. Second of all, rationalize your decision. It is important that you think of all the problems that might occur during the production and how to solve them. This is what I call the pessimistic way of thinking, which served me quite often. It served me well because we all know that it's not a question of whether you will have a bug, it's a question of when. And third of all, experiment. This goes to both UX designers and developers that need to fail every once in a while in order to succeed. By experimenting, we can see exactly what is good and what will suck, and therefore we can be better at what we are doing and who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Honestly, that was very interesting. Presentation was very cool as well. So thanks for that. And yeah, again, I don't see any questions, but if you want to ask Matt something in private, I'll send you his contact details. Yeah, virtual applause in the chat. Yeah,
By the way, if I may,
sure.
I'm sending here in the chat all the libraries I mentioned in this talk, so you can have a quick, you can get quickly the docs without need to search and Google it. So here it is. So you can all,
Ah, fantastic.
just open the docs and access it freely. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. So yeah, Tech is an open community. So if you want to offer or propose something for our next events, feel free to get in touch. And yeah, that was a very interesting event. And as I said, you will get the links to the screen recordings of these presentations in a few days. So maybe on Thursday or Friday. So thank you to our four wonderful speakers, and thank you to everyone who has participated. And yeah, I hope to see you soon, and have a nice evening or day. What time is it in Israel at the moment?
8:20.
8:20.
Yeah, we're 1 hour.
Ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So good evening to everyone. Have a nice evening, and I hope to see you soon.
Israel is full of developers.
Sorry, John.
Israel is full of developers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good ones as well. Very good.
Jonathan, we're one of the most strongest startup nations, in the world. We're competing Silicon Valley in that matter. About the amount of developers and programmers and startups. And yeah.
Yeah, I can tell looking at you three, all the knowledge you have about frameworks and CSS and JavaScript and that, you're above the game in terms of knowledge. So
Thank you.
well done. Yeah.
Yeah. That was very interesting, definitely.
Yeah. Interesting takeaways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got the screen recordings. So if you know someone who missed the event, there's no problems because we will have access to the links in a few days. So yeah, from California, that's amazing. Yeah, that's the best thing of these online events. It's so easy to connect from anywhere. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, thanks for that, and thank you to all the participants that came in, left, and
Okay.
yeah, thanks for that. Okay,
Yeah, let's follow each other. Let's follow each other online and let's keep in contact.
Yeah, definitely.
Take care.
And we organise other kinds of events. So if you know startups or other professionals from other sectors that would like to take part as speakers, feel free to get in touch with me, and we'll make sure that they will attend as speakers. Okay. So thanks for that again, and have a nice evening. Bye bye.
You too.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Ciao ciao.